Thank you for returning and ripping yourself away from California weather for the second session of today, which is officially called, let's see, Supporting Designers. First up is Anna Valgorda from the University of Copenhagen, and she will talk about interaction design as a bricolage practice. Let's welcome Anna.
Thank you. And so it's not University of Copenhagen, it's the IT University of Copenhagen. Not quite the same, but almost, located right next to each other. Anyway, interaction design as a bricolage practice. Bricolage, many of you might know, it's sort of quite often in everyday talk translated into tinkering or sort of hacking and all that. But we wanted, so Ylva, I wrote this paper together with Ylva Fernaeus. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here. She's in the last week of her maternity leave, so she'll probably return strong next year. But we sort of started to discussing this and wanted to dig in a little bit deeper into what is bricolage. And I would also like to extend a thanks to Peter Bennett, who kindly lent me a picture of his awesome workspace here that we'll get back to. So bricolage in Levi-Strauss, The Savage Mind, is a little bit more complex than just plain tinkering. He combines it with something that he calls mythical thinking. So mythical thinking is sort of the abstract plane, and bricolage is the hands-on plane. And I'll go into more in detail now what those two are. So there are many aspects of bricolage, but there are three sort of key aspects that we found interesting to bring forward here. First of all, the bricoleur works from a finite set of tools and materials for each project. So his universe of instruments is closed, and the rules of his game are always to make whatever is at hand. So there is sort of a finite set, a closed treasury of things and tools that you can work from. Second, the bricoleur does not need the equipment and knowledge of all trades and professions, but operates based on interpretations of the relation between the materials and tools before him. So we all recognize this. We typically either sort of computer scientists, industrial designers, mechanical engineers. We are rarely all three of them at the same time, even though we often wish we were. But we learn some of it as we go along, and we make do with what we know in our sort of space. But going on. So the way he works, or she, the bricoleur interrogates all the heterogeneous objects of which his treasury is composed. So to discover what each of them could signify, and so contributes to the definition of a set which has yet to materialize, but which will ultimately differ from the instrumental set only in the internal dispositions of its parts. So a long mouthful here. So this would correspond to Peter not leaving his office and just making do with all the sort of previous projects that he's done, and perhaps taking them apart and reinterpreting them, and using sort of the tools and all the other materials that he has sort of within reach from his chair, I guess, pretty much. Good. So this is how you practically go about doing the bricolage. And then I think the most interesting aspect here is when we apply the mythical thinking as well. And this is probably also what becomes difficult for most of us, because we're trained in sort of a science engineering way of thinking. But mythical thinking is a way of thinking that connects events, not because that would give an insight, but because these events take place, they're immediately presented to the senses. So they might happen at the same time. They might remind us, happen at the same time physically or whatever, play with different kinds of senses, but somehow enable us to combine them. Second, mythical thought does not discriminate in layers of knowledge as scientific thought does. So rather it appropriates everything at the same level, which is why it's able to bridge events differently. So this is also a little bit mind-blowing, for we are so used to sort of this way of hierarchies in our way of thinking. So coming back to an example in a bit. So mythical thought is not merely a naive predecessor to scientific thinking. Rather, it's a way of thinking that's with entirely different ways and means, and they can coexist. We have mythical thinking in our society. We just tend to perhaps not acknowledge it all the time, but, you know, knock on wood, and all be fine. So an example of this that Lévi-Strauss uses is combining toothache and a woodpecker, right? And you can, I mean, obviously they are not connected, but if you walk in the woods and you hear woodpecker, you might sort of bridge the two, so the woodpecker going at it, and you can sort of feel the throbbing pain in your tooth. So what does this give us? I don't know, maybe nothing. Maybe it gives us a poetic sort of feeling, revelation, just sort of a way of thinking. Maybe we start to see the woodpecker slightly differently. Maybe we experience our toothache even worse than we did before. So there is something interesting, I think, in applying this way of thinking. And what does this mean for interaction design and ultimately, in this context, tangible and material computing? Well, all of us who has done projects, who has built something, know that the physical world is really imprecise, right? And it changes all the time, it's unstable and so on. So instead of just always say, well, in the future, we will find a better solution for this, and just ignore these instabilities, maybe we should try to exploit them and work with the impreciseness of the physical world more sort of deliberately. The second point is that it enables us to develop a non-hierarchical sort of negotiation of forms. So it's not that form follows function or function follows form. They are sort of at the same time, at the same level that we negotiate them. Another aspect is we've seen here, I mean, ideally in this tangible computing, we have all sorts of materials at our disposal, but we still see so many displays of glass and aluminium and all these sort of rather stale and stable, I guess, materials, and this is why we find them appealing. But maybe we could start to have sort of more culturally grounded designs that are locally grounded as well and inspired by traditions here. And finally, I think sort of there's something to, it's possible that we can come up with new uses of technologies and even new technologies by beginning to combine woodpeckers and toothaches. So making these odd connections of things and force ourselves or train ourselves to see things in a new light. Okay, so I'll come up with a couple of examples here. I'm teaching a class, Introduction to sort of Interaction Design, and we use these SparkFun kits, and I'm sorry to say it, but the sensors and actuators in that kit are really, really crappy. And instead of sort of saying to the students, oh, well, but in theory, they should have a range of 2 meters and so on, I forced them to, so these kits have been through a couple of hands, so they've deteriorated a little bit. And I tell them, okay, don't come up with specifications, but try to explain to me the qualities of this particular sensor, of this particular motor. So what can you do with it? So they explore these as sort of the materials that they have, and then they need to come up with some inspirational bits, some different setups that explores these or uses these qualities. So that's sort of the first part of the exercise. The second part is that they run around my lab and take materials and whatever odd bits and pieces we have lying, and have to are sort of asked to give body to these to this design. We also give them a context, so they have some limitations. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the final design here, but this group had one of these distance sensors, and they realized that it worked much better with soft curves than with sort of hard surfaces or sort of more I don't know, squared surfaces. Yeah. So they had done a design sort of super simple, the textile moving. That was not the important part. The important part, there was only sort of one girl in the group that was really sort of busty, with which it could interact, because that was sort of the ideal way of interacting. So all of a sudden, it was just not just a distance sensor. It discriminated in slightly different ways. So they discovered new qualities of these imperfection. Not rocket science here, but just an example of sort of how you can also go about working with these technologies. The rich cultural references and material expressions. Some of you maybe know that Ylva and I had this pleasure to study Aina, which is a musical body. We presented this at this last year. And it's a wonderful combination of all sorts of instruments. It's done by two artists, one trained as a musician, one trained as a mechanical engineer. None of them had built an instrument before they took on this challenge. And it took them 2 years to put this together. And it's sort of what we found inspiring, besides sort of the soundscape that it makes, is the sort of massive number of or kinds of materials and forms and qualities that they have put into this instrument. So it's not just using the Lego or using the sort of the safe surfaces. It's working with the imperfections of it all. We have a shoe shine machine. We have solenoid from a car engine. We have switchboard, old telephone switchboard, sort of. So it's a combination of all sorts of local cultural artifacts that they found on flea markets and so on. So that's the second point. The third point is this leveling of the playing field. So I talked about this form follows function. I also, in a previous paper, talked about sort of interaction design as the physical form and how we interact with it and how we sort of design the behavior of it. And from a bricolage, mythical thinking point of view, we wouldn't start, perhaps we would start with one of them, because depending on what we had in our hands or what idea we had, but it wouldn't be that one was more important than the others. They would all have to be designed and negotiated in sort of a constant flow of events. Third, making new connections. Or is this fourth, maybe? Anyways, making new connections. So Franco Clivio, I had this fortune to see his exhibition in Milan this summer. And he has written this book, Hidden Forms, where he collects all sorts of artifacts and put them together in new ways. So this is a sort of a collection of things that keeps things together. That's sort of the driving force here. So all of a sudden we have clothes buttons and a huge hook, which we would normally never think of together, but sort of, okay, this is how we keep things together. Maybe we should start using clothes button at the harbor or vice versa. I don't know. Could probably give some problems, but perhaps new solutions to things as well. Another example of this is bricolage from the art world that we, where it's pretty common, or at least used in a sort of lots of different ways. I particularly like this piece by Sarah C, where she sort of combines all sorts of everyday objects, like a water bottle and an overhead projector, and puts them together in this universe. And it's not because she particularly finds the aesthetics of a water bottle interesting, but she wants to sort of put it in a context where we see, okay, here it's close to objects that it wouldn't be close to in our everyday life, but it's still an everyday object that we know intimately, that we have sort of had in our mouth or held in our hands and so on. But putting it in this universe of other everyday objects, we might see it differently. It becomes an aesthetic sort of, object. So this is also about putting things together and making new connections in a non-hierarchical way. So to finish this off, interaction design as a bricolage practice is not supposed to be dogmatic. So it's not, oh, now we can only work and think like this. But it is supposed to be sort of an alternative way of seeing things and working compared to, for instance, conceptual design or engineering, that we can sort of have qualities from leveling the playing field, from making these new connections, from the impreciseness of our physical world, from the cultural groundedness that the local outlook gives us, and sort of, enables us to make these new connections. There are downsides to bricolage, obviously, especially sort of the local outlook, that we're not supposed to find globally optimal solutions. They're supposed to be simply local optimal. And or whatever, local solutions, and thus they might be globally suboptimal, but it might be good enough, and it might sort of draw in qualities from our local environment, from Pete's office, from sort of whatever we have at hand, and as such, I think there are some true qualities in trying to go about this. So, speed it through. Thank you.
Oh, we have plenty more time.
Yeah, there was 20 minutes, wasn't it?
Are there any questions?
So I actually believe that there's nothing but bricolage. There's nothing, you never have the complete global set of tools available. And in fact, the scientific process is only getting as good as you can get with what you can grab. But I also worry about, or don't know if I agree that there's something culturally grounding in assembling a pile of things that are dissimilar. So that was a point you were talking about that I wanted to see if you could clarify also.
So in one point you have bricolage all over, and the second point you don't see a bricolage in a I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just not, I don't see how that is culturally you used the word culturally grounding, and I'm a little confused about that, because the cultural grounding is typically in a simulate. I don't know. It seems very different to me than grasping dissimilar things,
sure,
and assembling them. Yeah.
I think none of these examples sort of follows the full list of bricolage through and through at all. I think these are different ways of using the mythical way of thinking and bricolage in different ways. And some of them are culturally grounded, some of them stays within a very close treasury, some of them sort of have a local outlook, others, some of them work hierarchically, I can't really say that word today, way of thinking. So that's what I mean. None of them are dogmatic. I don't think all work, and I certainly think this conference and these presentations that we've seen in the last couple of days exemplified that it's a very engineering way of thinking, and it's very hierarchical and sort of claiming global contributions and so on. So I think there is a spectrum here between the bricolage and the engineering. And I think there are qualities in sort of exploring that spectrum a little bit more.
Hi, Paul Dursch from UC Irvine. Thank you very much for this. And my question in some ways is going to start sort of in the same place as Ted's. But I think there's a really radical reading in here, a really radical premise, and I kind of want to push you to say it because you didn't. It seems to me that so in Levi-Strauss, the point, of course, is that not that there's mythical thinking on one side and there's scientific thinking on the other, but that scientific thinking is in self mythical, right? That's the essence of the sort of level playing field. It's always all of those, and that suggests in the context of TEI, perhaps, that what you're saying is that actually we need to start thinking also about, for instance, graphical user interfaces as being tangible and embodied, right, themselves. And stop thinking about these things sort of in a sort of taxonomic manner, but rather as sort of like simultaneous sets of stories that we tell about the technologies that we encounter.
But that said, at the same time, Levi-Strauss talks about the need for sort of, I mean, he was a structuralist, right? So you wanted to classify things because that enables us to actually think. But we might classify things not like Linné would do it with the botanical or Darwin or whatever, but we might sort of just say this is over here and this is over here and yeah. Anyways, but
if there's still a bit of time. Hi, Caroline from Eindhoven University, and I really loved your talk and the things that you done up there. And also in your comment to the previous question, you basically said that you see the conflict in what we've done over the past, I've presented over the past days. And that's for me the beauty, but also the difficulty. Do you have pointers for us in saying, like, okay, we have the beauty of this culturally enriched things, whereas you have this technology that somewhat, it is culturally kind of embedded, of course, but it has also this kind of certain language to it and a certain expression to it, which might make it more difficult to connect them and to use the complexity of it all. So it seems almost that many of us are looking for new stuff instead of also looking at the old stuff, etc. So can you mingle these words, these worlds, and where does it stop, and what is your experience in that?
So my experience is very limited because I've just started to thinking about this, and inspired by the Aina musical instrument, it was like, okay, these guys are not sort of building these instruments to be optimal at all. They're building them to have this lives together and work in harmony and all sorts of practical problems. And I think it was, in our community, it would be rather daring. We've perhaps seen some steampunk projects, but other than that, we haven't really seen people that dare to use wood that isn't super hard, so it's sturdy, like we talked about the other day, or sort of, if we see the textile installations, we see they break down all the time because people put hardware in them and don't try to work on the premise of the textile and so on. So I think there are sort of lots of craft skills that we could bring into working with technologies, and also start working with technologies as craft persons. And I think most of you who do PCBs and so on feel that this is exactly what you're doing already. So it's not that I'm saying we should change things radically, but perhaps allow ourselves not to only look towards sort of sci-fi or sort of a modernistic aesthetics, but also bring in more rococo or whatever you call that in English. But yeah.
I must say, your information, apparently there are some Japanese, but I have to find the reference, who are really looking at new printing machines, etc., and working with the imperfection of the machines instead of the perfection of the machines. Yeah. And then you get far more craftsman-like things.
Exactly. So trying to look for the imperfections of the technology, I think, could push us a little bit in that
Very
direction.
nice. I would really much love if the audience works on this in the upcoming year and we get more examples.
I would too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's give her a hand.